For those of us just joining, my name is Cynthia Giwa. I'm ProPublica's marketing director. I hope you've had a chance to read and sit with the stories that our panelists will be discussing today, but I'll tell you a little bit about it. Last fall, ProPublica Illinois engagement reporter Logan Jaffe reported on the small town of Anna, Illinois, which has a reputation for being a sundown town, where historically Black people were not welcome after dark. Last month, Logan returned to the town of Anna, where she was surprised to learn that young people there were organizing its first Black Lives Matter protests. But Anna is just one of many small, mostly white towns across the country that are having similar conversations and demonstrations around race and racism in their communities. So here to talk about all of this, we have an excellent panel. On your screen, we have Logan Jaffe, ProPublica Illinois engagement reporter. We've got Jessica Moore, who grew up a few miles outside of Anna and was one of the organizers of the Black Lives Matter protest there last month. Welcome, Jessica. We have Takia Coleman, another co-organizer of the demonstration in Anna and a resident of Anna. We also have James W. Lowen, a historian, sociologist, and author of Sundown Towns, A Hidden Dimension of American Racism, among other books. Thanks for joining us. And we have our moderator today, ProPublica Illinois reporter Mick Dumke. Our panelists will also be answering your questions. So if you'd like to submit a question at any time, click the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen to type it in, and we'll get to those during the Q&A portion. But first, I'll throw it over to our moderator, Mick.
Thanks, Cynthia, and welcome to everybody who's joined us. We really appreciate you being part of the conversation. Since our time's limited, let's just jump right in. I wanted to start with my colleague, Logan. Your reporting is the reason, I think, for this particular moment, why this group of us is having this conversation. Logan, you're not from Anna. You're not even originally from Illinois. How did you end up reporting on the history of Anna? What drew you to it? And how did you sort of navigate that, being someone who's from outside of Anna?
Right. So, as Mick said, I am not a native of Illinois, unlike Dr. Lowen. But the entry point for me was actually, I think, potentially like many people who learn about sundown towns, was through Dr. Lowen's book called Sundown Towns. And in the book, I think Anna is actually, if it's not the first town, it's one of the earliest towns mentioned in the book. The very first one. So you didn't have to go very far, at least in the book. But so I've always been really fascinated in sort of, the story behind the story. And I had read an account of Anna in Dr. Lowen's book. I was in Southern Illinois, and I went to Anna. And I was very surprised because within about 20, 30 minutes of being there, I was getting a bite to eat at a restaurant, got to talking with some people sitting around me. And I hadn't necessarily prompted this question in any other way other than, tell me about this town. And the first thing that, the person a couple seats down from me said was, well, Anna's called ANNA, which stands for Ain't No N-Words Allowed. But as far as being an outsider, that was sort of a moment that made me realize I'm an outsider, and yet this person who lives here is telling me an outsider who they don't know, this kind of shocking fact. And I think it could be telling in a lot of ways that was the first thing that person would bring up. But I think to answer your question, Mick, positioning myself and sort of acknowledging that I am not from a place and trying to navigate, learning from insiders and people who live there, but being very frank. Like I would tell people, I'm from Chicago. I keep hearing about this thing, ANNA. Have you heard about that? And the more people I just asked that same exact question over and over to, there was not anybody who I spoke with who lived there who didn't know about it. And so that's what got me hooked on really reporting that story out more.
James, I wonder if you could just tell us, before we get into sort of what's happened more recently, if you can tell us a little bit about just the context of sundown towns and kind of how Anna fits into that.
Anna is one of the 3 towns in Illinois that are kind of poster children for sundown towns because they are so outrageous and so famous. Anna, because of its incredible nickname, A-N-N-A, that I think Logan said, so I won't. Pekin, Illinois, which for years was the head of the Ku Klux Klan, and even the Klan actually even owned the Pekin newspaper for a brief period of time. And Cicero, which is a Chicago suburb and had repeated actual race riots, and by race riots I mean riots by white people, to keep black people from moving in 1951, 61, 71, and 81, every 10 years. But it turns out there are sundown towns in Illinois. Now, I grew up in Illinois. I had no idea. I grew up in Decatur, right in the center of Illinois. And it turns out that of the 23 towns that are the closest to Decatur, sprinkled around them, 20 of them were sundown towns. I had no idea. I thought black folks were just showing good judgment by not living in these dinky little towns, too small to have a motion picture theater. But no, each of these towns had a policy, formal or informal. And if you moved in and you were African American, you maybe had a fire in your house that you didn't cause. That happened in one of these towns. Somebody beat your kid up on his or her first day in school, or you were just advised you'd better leave town. And that's how they stayed white for decade after decade.
So they didn't necessarily need to circulate a memo about this. The word was spread in other ways. There wasn't necessarily a sign up saying this, but although, Logan, I think in your reporting, you may have heard that there were at least rumors that there had been signs outside of Anna at one point in time, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And I basically every person I asked, I also asked them that question. What do you know about this sign? Where was it? When, at what time period do you remember it? Some people did not remember. Some people had very specific memories, but kind of corroborating all of those was difficult. I mean, to find, I did not find a single piece of evidence, like a photograph or a document to show that specifically.
It's very hard to find the evidence. I remember talking about this in a town just a little ways east of Anna, West Frankfort, which is another sundown town. And I was talking to the librarian, and she talked about the sign. And I said, and as you guys have pointed out, most sundown towns never even had a sign. I got a comment to make about that too. But in West Frankfort, I said to the librarian, well, who was also the head of the Historical Society, I said, well, do you have the sign or do you have a photo of it? And she replied, no, why would we keep that? Well, if you're the Historical Society, that is, of course, one of the more important aspects of the town's history. And here you have a memento of it. You have an actual sign or you have an actual photo of it. That's why you would keep that. But many, many historical societies in small towns and even in larger cities really only want to talk about the good things that happened in the town. And they don't want to dwell on the fact that the town was for decades, including when I was there 10 years ago, was a sundown town.
Jessica and Takia, I want to get you into this conversation. Wondering how much of this whole history did you know about? How much were you thinking about in Anna specifically when you decided to organize this march or demonstration last month? Or were you just thinking about this just needs to happen now? Or was it all those things at once?
It was all of those things. Like basically how Logan said, when you move to the town or when you're in the town, people talk about those things, especially if you're around surrounding areas. They will tell you, like, don't go to the town because they all know what the town is known for. So basically all those things was in consideration when we was planning the events. We have heard about the sign. We never seen it. Yeah, it was all put into place while we was planning the event.
And as I understand, Takia, you moved to Anna just a few years ago, right after living in Chicago previously. I do want to get Jessica in the conversation, but can you tell us just a little bit about what that transition was like, going from Chicago to a small city with this kind of the weight of history?
It was big. Right before we moved here, we moved in Mounds, Illinois for a couple of months. And when we told them that we was moving to Anna, everyone was asking us, like, do you know what that stands for? Like, you all shouldn't go there. Like, it wouldn't be safe. Like, so I was terrified moving here. I was really scared. When I went to the high school, I found out that it's some bad, but it's a lot of good. It's a lot of good people there also. So it didn't take a lot of time for me to, you know, get comfortable, or, you know, especially when I heard about the history, like about hearing things like that, it makes you want to get comfortable. It makes you want to be involved.
Sorry, Mick.
Mick, you're on mute. Mick, you're muted.
Sorry, everybody. Technology here 101, which I briefly failed there. Unmuted now, I think. What I was trying to say was, Jessica, you grew up, as I understand, in the area. And so what was your experience like going into and making the decision to get involved and organize this march?
Growing up around here, I lived in Olin, which is 20 minutes away from here. My mom always worked in Anna. There wasn't a time in my childhood that I remember coming to Anna and it being peaceful. That played a part in it. And then just thinking, my kid's gonna grow up around here. You know, multiple other kids of color are gonna grow up around here, and they need a different environment to grow up in. They shouldn't have to come to Anna or go to Walmart and, you know, be stared at and be talked about. I wanted to do it for a lot of reasons personally, but mainly those ones.
What's happened since the march? What's kind of feedback have you, both of you, had? How do you feel about it now, a couple weeks later?
I'm glad we did it. We made ourselves heard all over. We've made it known that these smaller towns around here, and especially Anna, is still known for racism. So, whew, yeah.
Didn't you have something like 200 people?
Yes, almost 200 people.
That's astonishing. How did you achieve that?
We just got on Messenger on Facebook and started messaging people, and then we made flyers and just shared them. We were really only expecting 50 to 100 people, if that, and we almost got 200, so that was pretty awesome.
I thought it was awesome.
James, I wondered what your reaction was, aside from thinking it was awesome, knowing this sort of arc of history up until this moment, and sort of tied in with, there's this movement now to try to replace or dismantle various monuments to racism and racists. So just, I guess, first of all, what was your reaction to hearing about the Black Lives Matter protests in Anna, and just this moment we're in where people are talking about going through and getting rid of statues and other kinds of symbols of these earlier eras?
The last 3 weeks, or maybe 4 weeks, have been some of the most fun weeks of my life, and I'm 78 years old. I mean, I've been arguing since 1999 in my book, Lies Across America, that Confederate statues are in fact lies and need to come down and get put into museums with all kinds of context around them that tells you what they do teach. They do teach something useful about the period 1890 to 1940, which is the period when most of them went up. But they don't teach anything useful about the Civil War, about which they simply lie. There have been towns that are marked by Confederate statues that are having BLM protests at those statues. And then we have these sundown towns, not just Anna, but other sundown towns across the United States that have been having BLM marches and so on. And so it's just been wonderful. I want to make this comment. Nobody is just a racist. And let me give you an example. Calhoun County, Illinois, not too far from Anna. It's in central Illinois. It's just north of St. Louis, Missouri, actually. The whole county, the last time I was there, was a Sundown County. Not one black family lived in that county. Well, there was one interracial couple. I was there about when President Obama took office. So that was what, 9 years ago when he took office the first time, 10, 11 years ago by now. And that county had voted for Obama by 52% to 47%. Now that's an all-white county. You got to remember, white people in America did not vote for Obama. They voted for McCain. The only reason Obama won was because black people voted for Obama overwhelmingly, and Latino and Asian American people voted for Obama substantially. So that was an unracist act to vote for Obama. Yet this is in a county which, when they did not allow American. Now that's a contradiction. And so the same person can be racist given one frame of rhetoric or in one situation and unracist in another. And we have to realize that and appeal to their unracist side. And that's what I think Jessica and these other people have done so remarkably when they organized this march in Anna.
You know, Takia, you were talking about some of this complexity where there's this history, you felt some of it personally moving there, but yet you went to school and it sounds like you've met a lot of people you like and people you can get along with. I'm wondering about what that means going forward. What do you hope for coming out of the march? What are you hearing from people? What opportunities do you see to kind of keep things moving forward?
Definitely more events in the future. Since they happened, it was a lot of negative comments and a lot of people not taking it serious. And I feel like they won't take it serious if it's just one event that we did. You know, one event, it just goes into history, like it has to be a continuous like pattern. So everyone, can understand what it's for, the actual meaning of it all.
What do you mean by people weren't taking it seriously? Were they just saying, oh, it's just a one-time thing, or how exactly, what kind of reactions?
And after the protest, there was a lot of people that was recording the protest and was making a lot of racist slurs and still, making jokes about the protest. And that's what I mean. Like, if it's just one thing that happened in the past, then they won't take it serious unless it's other events that shows that, this is what we want to be done. Like, we want it to stop.
You're not going away. In other words, sending that message. Jessa,
Mm-hmm.
you've been nodding this whole time. What's your take on it?
I agree with her completely. Anna needs another one. They've just been saying hateful things and laughing it away and, back down or this will happen. Well, no, it's already started, so we want to be taken seriously. I'm a part of a group in Mount Vernon, and we've recently located down here for Union County, and we are planning on organizing more events and doing all that good stuff to try to get the community involved as well. So we're hoping that'll help out, but like Takia said, there's going to be more because it's not taken seriously. I'm sure you guys heard about the Trump rally they had at the Rent One parking lot where they were riding around with their rebel flags, screaming the N-word and all that good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to make it known we're not kidding. Our lives matter. Our kids' lives matter. Other people's lives matter. It's not just white people's lives matter here.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I did see, and I've heard, so I believe it was a couple days after, maybe a week after, and I'm not sure how long this event was planned, but there was it was a caravan that of cars that met in a parking lot and did a kind of a miles long driving tour around Union County, displaying a lot of, Trump signs, and there, I believe that there was some Confederate battle flag imagery. So just to let everybody know, like, what we're referring to here.
Logan,
Yeah.
No, go ahead, please.
I wonder if I could make a suggestion. I think every sundown town in America, not just the flamboyant ones like Anna, but also the elegant suburbs like Kenilworth, Illinois, which is a beautiful suburb of Chicago, but just as much a sundown town as Anna ever was. I think every sundown town in America needs to take 3 steps. First, they need to admit it. Yes, we did this. And there's all kinds of proof with regard to Anna. It's in my book, and you guys have found it too. Logan has found all kinds of proof. Second of all, we did this and it was wrong and we're sorry. In other words, apologize. And third, and we don't do it anymore. And that needs some actual steps, like we are hiring Black teachers. We are hiring Black policemen, Black garbage collectors, and we're trying to house them in Anna Jonesboro or in Kenilworth or whatever sundown town we're talking about. And once you've taken those 3 steps, then you are no longer a sundown town. Then you've made some real progress. But until you do, so that might be something, Takia and the rest of you in Anna, that you shoot for to get the community to sign on to. And even if they don't sign on to it, they will say some very interesting things as they fail.
Yes, you have to acknowledge it. Like before the protest, when we was meeting with officers, about how the protest was going to be ran, they were saying that they never had an experience when they pulled a Black person over in Anna of them being scared for their life. And I just told them, I'm like, I cannot believe that. I cannot. My friends, some of them are scared to drive through Anna. Like, they're terrified. So I cannot believe that.
Sure. Well, if they take the 3 steps, see, then they're essentially telling their own white population.
You have to acknowledge
that. And they're also telling Black folks, you don't need to be scared no more.
I'm glad you brought that up, James, because, just want to make it clear to everybody out there, this is Jessica and Takia are working for change in their own community. And there's some specific things happening in Anna, but this isn't a conversation just about Anna, right? We're talking about issues that go to other towns. We're talking about places that, even if they may not have met the definition of a sundown town, to this day are incredibly segregated or have vast disparities within the community. And so this is a conversation that really goes beyond just this specific place as well. Jessica, did you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I agree with you completely. I've been to protests around, not even around here. I've drove 2 hours to go to a protest just to show my support. You're completely right. It's not just sundown towns or little towns around here. It needs to be everywhere, not just specifically in smaller areas. Everybody needs to be aware of what is going on in their hometowns, in their cities, wherever. They need to know that racism still exists and that we can get along, we can become friends. Let's change the world. Let's make big things come from it. Like, yeah.
And Logan, before we wrap up this part of the conversation, I wondered what you had heard from some of your sources, circling back to your original reporting. What have you heard from them in the last few weeks?
Yeah, well, I want to go back to when the first story that I wrote about Anna published in late November. So, it was at first it was sort of a mixed bag. There were a number of people who lived either in Anna or in similar communities or surrounding communities, some, pointing the finger at just like the fact that I was reporting on racism at all is the reason why racism still exists. Then on the other hand, there were a lot of people who just wanted to share their stories because they related to it, whether it was in Anna or in sundown towns or related towns all around the country. So people have a lot of their own experiences that they really wanted to share. But recently, so this one particular individual, a city council member in Anna, at first wrote to me, you know, fairly upset, saying I was damaging the town's reputation, which I find a bit ironic because the town's reputation is ANNA to begin with. But, you know, after a series of conversations, like very fascinating conversations, this one city council member really saw an opportunity, or at least a starting place, through the work of these young organizers to talk about this community reputation. And he even, you know, ran the idea by me. He said, you know, maybe we should make yard signs saying "Ain't no negativity allowed," which I know is one of the chants that I saw in the live stream of the Black Lives Matter protest in Anna.
Yes, that is our new motto. Hopefully, we will get it stuck in everybody else's hands eventually.
So yeah, we're gonna actually thank you everyone on the panel. We're gonna open up the conversation to some of your questions in the audience. But as a reminder, if you'd like to ask a question, click the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen to type it to us. So we have a lot of questions here about, for Jessica and Takia, sort of about who came to the march. You know, was it younger residents, newer residents, longtime residents? And do you have a sense of the percentage of the participants who are actually residents of Anna as opposed to people from outside of the town? So who was there?
We had a lot of people, white people to be exact, from Anna who were walking with us. They were younger and older, people out in wheelchairs and all. There, Takia, what would you say the percentage would be of
People that was not from Anna?
well, that lived in Anna?
Oh, that lived in Anna. Half of the people. Half was from Anna and half was from other cities, towns near.
Yes.
Okay.
And I know also just that a lot of other people showed up, not necessarily to participate in the march, but it was such a spectacle in Anna that there were, you know, people kind of lining the sidewalks and storefronts just to, I've spoken with some of them just to basically witness this historic thing happening in their community.
Yeah, I didn't even count those people because they just stood there basically to put their opinions out and say negative things. Some was just sitting there watching us. That's why I didn't, you know, add them into the protest because they wasn't really participating in the protest. But yes, it was a lot of them.
A lot.
Thank you. Our next question was actually emailed in advance, and it's from DW for Dr. Lowen. So he says, I found out from your book that I grew up in a sundown town, Lidditz, Pennsylvania. When I was in school in the 1960s and 70s, there were no people of color living in the town, save for one family from India. I never knew why, simply accepted it as the way things were. Now I know, and I wonder if Dr. Lowen can address how one can go about researching a town's history of exclusion. Where do you begin to look for the evidence of the efforts that went into actively excluding people of color from the community? Where would that information be buried?
But the first thing to do is to actually go to my website, and anybody can go to my website by typing my name into Google with quotation marks around it, and it comes up first, James W. Lowen, Loewen, okay? And then you go to my website, and then you click on the Sundown Towns book. It's easy to remember, it's called Sundown Towns. And once you're there, there's a 3-page maybe, how to a sundown town. And it tells you how to do the census stuff to make sure that the town was overwhelmingly white for census after census. Lots of people will seize upon one really racist thing. I'll give you an example, Jasper, Texas, where there was that terrible dragging death. And people will send me emails saying, well, Jasper has to be a sundown town. Look at that dragging death. Well, no. The person who was dragged to death was a resident of Jasper. And there's lots of other black folks, residents of Jasper. A terrible thing happened, but terrible things happen in Chicago and Atlanta and all kinds of towns that do allow blacks to spend the night. So you have to go through the things I tell you to go through in terms of the census, and then you start doing oral history, and you ask people questions. You ask old people, librarians, you ask ministers, you ask maybe firefighters, people who have time on their hands and can talk with outsiders. And you ask them the questions sensibly, and you do it carefully, and you take good notes, and you, each one of you across the country, can prove a given town to be Sundown. And if you do, send the information to me, and I'll get it up on my website, for one thing, but then also use it within the community so that some group, maybe it's the First Methodist Church, or maybe it's the Chamber of Commerce, or whoever you can get on your side, some group says, well, let's do something about this. Let's transcend this past. And there's a couple of towns in the United States that I talk about at my website and give clear examples. You can even ask them how they did it. One is Goshen, Indiana, and one is La Crosse, Wisconsin. Both of them were sundown towns, and they took the steps, and they aren't sundown towns anymore.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Brendan Fitzgerald of the Columbia Journalism Review. Questions for Jessica and Takia. So there are plenty of instances of news outlets covering protests in ways that delegitimize or take away from the work of organizers and activists. I'd like to hear from Jessica and Takia about their interactions with Logan and other reporters and how they feel their efforts have been covered. I'd also like to hear from Logan about how she built trust with organizers and activists in order to best represent their concerns. Whoever wants to take that first can go in.
Hello.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm going to wait till you all speak first, because I want to hear how you think about this.
Your interactions with Logan or other reporters and how you feel your efforts have been covered.
Well, with Logan, we seen a previous news article with her that was done, I believe, last year. She did the Hart family, and she did a couple of more people. So we seen her work, and like everyone and Anna was talking about the news article. So like we knew like basically that she was trying to get to the bottom of what Anna means and what it stands for and how basically we can change it. So when she approached me personally, I knew her already, like, cause I knew of her work. So I had no problem trusting her.
Yeah, I agree with you.
And Logan, how did you, as a reporter, sort of earn the trust of people who maybe had reasons to be wary of a reporter?
Yeah, I mean, I think it does go back to a lot of what Takia and Jessica were saying. I think the fact that that there was that first story that showed really a long research process of history, I think that helped. So in my mind, I wasn't, I was covering this event, which the Black Lives Matter protest, which I wasn't exactly at, but what I was covering, really, I saw it as an extension of the first story that I did, because it really kind of lingered on this question of, has Anna changed? Has it not? If so, how? So it all ties back into that central question that I posed like right at the beginning of the story. So to me, it was, while it was coverage of a protest, the protest, I saw it as more of a potential outcome. And I'm not saying that like this would not have happened in any way if it weren't for that story, but it related to the question of, how is a place changing? How does the story that a place tells about itself, how is that changing? So, I mean, in my mind, there was no better way to do that than like speaking with Jessica and Takia and a lot of the other young organizers. So, I mean, we got in touch through texting. A lot of the young organizers put me in touch with other young organizers through their group chat and through text. And I remember when I forget if it was to you, Takia, or Jessica, but it took a while to once one of you realized that like I was the same person who wrote that first story and like the dots connected. We were like, oh yeah. And then we like linked up and kind of like synced up in a way that we had a kind of a more established sort of vocabulary. So I felt like that first story did a lot of work to show that I like where this is coming from.
I agree. I think it's about how the reporters approach you too. If they come at you all, oh, I want you to do this and this, instead of asking you how you feel about it, it helps a lot too. Most of the reporters I've dealt with have been very nice and caring, and they still contact me just to make sure I'm safe. And I got interviewed by Ella Magazine, for instance, and that's crazy. Sorry, had to brag on that for a second. That's crazy. But they were all just genuine, nice people. It's just about how you approach people and how you talk to them. And that's really what I have to say about that.
All right, thank you. Our next question comes from Gianna. She says, I live in a small logging town in rural Oregon, which is a state with a history of racial exclusion laws. A number of us in town have been pressuring our city council to pass a resolution in support of racial justice, but are confronting denial that there's a problem with racism here because there are so few Black people in our local population and no reported incidents of police violence against them. There's this sort of catch-22 when you're in a mostly white town talking about race. So how do you start to make headway against such entrenched denial when they are resistant to education? Maybe Dr. Lowen can start this one.
I'd start by saying, I don't know which town it is, but look at my website, see if I've confirmed it, meaning has somebody in Oregon confirmed it and sent me proof, pretty much. I did do some research in Oregon. Most towns in Oregon that are all white are not all white by accident, all right? Something happened, and there's still some oral history memory of the events that maybe happened in 1890 or 1920 or 1940. And it may be quite a bit more recently. That is, it may be that some Black family tried to move into the town in 1982 and had such a bad time of it that they left. So do the research. That's the first thing I'd say. And then the second thing is, in a way, the whiteness of the town is a burden. And it's hard for you to say that if you're a person of color, but you need to have a white ally to say that. Say, look, we are impoverished because we live in such a white environment. And so we need to take steps as we can to deal with that. And maybe making a statement about BLM type things is a first step.
I want to add to that for a minute. So, one thing, I'll never forget something that one person, a white individual in Anna, said to me, and I'm paraphrasing, but she said, we've never really had any racial issues in our town because there aren't a lot of Black people who live here.
Yeah.
And to me, that really speaks to, first of all, and it's the willingness and the willful blindness in a lot of ways of white people to not recognize whiteness as a race, to really be so submerged in it that this is the norm and that a race is something that belongs to somebody else, but not you, if you're white. And so I think that as much work and demystifying that can go a long way into at least starting that conversation. Like if that is a mindset that somebody has, that race issues does not include whiteness as a race, that's also an initial conversation to have too.
Right. So the next question, there's two questions from Jesse and Carol. They're similar for Jessica and Takia. They ask, have you noticed any changes in the community since the march? And how have your neighbors treated you since the rally?
Okay.
Fine. They've been supportive of me, but when I come to Anna, for instance, the other day I was at the gas station pumping gas with my friend Amanda, and we got hollered out something, and I couldn't understand what they said, but they rolled up the window as soon as I turned around and just started revving up their engine. So I guess it was a bad response. I've had a lot of good responses, but mostly negative, and they don't want it to happen again. So I would probably say about 30% of Anna is against this movement right now, and the rest have been supportive.
And Takia, do you have anything to add?
The neighbors, yeah, the ones that know about the protests and stuff, they have been supportive. Others, that was like when like you're going to the store, like they stare, like they know it's definitely you that organized the protest. One guy even made like a slick remark, like at the neighborhood milk store, like he he said something, but like he mumbled it, and then like he just walked out the store. It's been a lot of things like basically like the Trump protests and little flags that's been, you know, on their cars since it, like trying to, I guess, send a message. Yeah, basically that.
Yeah. Okay. So sort of following up on that, this is a question from Neil. Jessica and Takia, what are the best practices that you have for Black people organizing in sundown towns, or even not a sundown town, maybe any small majority white town? Do you have any advice or suggestions for how they might go about that, best practices?
I would say get the police involved to see if the police will go on your side. See if they'll work with you. That is the most important thing, because you want your protection as well. You don't want to just go into it blindly, not having no protection at all. You need to have a strong mindset. You have to realize that people are going to test your patience out there. They're going to try to push your buttons. They're going to call you every name, but you cannot react the way they want to. So with my advice is stay strong, keep a level head, push forward, and do not give up. Don't let the people's negative comments stop you from doing what you believe in.
Let it influence you.
Mm. Our next question is from Pat, and this is sort of shifting away from sort of Black people leading around conversations around race, but how can white people move through and help change attitudes regarding conversations with other white people, particularly if they maintain that racism doesn't exist? I mean, it's a big question, but how can white people sort of engage other white people about racism, particularly when there is situations where there's resistance to even having the conversation or acknowledging that it exists?
Well, I'm going to use my mom, for example. She's white, and how she's handling it right now, even though I'm her child, she can go and get me all she wants, but she hasn't. She's been trying to inform people of what I'm doing and why I'm doing it, trying to educate them. Just mainly, I would say, try to educate people more. You don't have to argue with them. If they don't agree with you, then that's fine, but just push education on them.
Dr. Lowen, I was curious if you had any thoughts on that as well. I'm someone who does a lot of this work.
I actually do. I think that lots of our culture is white rather than right. For instance, lots of the history that we learn. And my book, Lies My Teacher Told Me, is about that. And it has actually caused a lot of people to change their minds about things. I mean, I'll just give you a real quick example. All across Illinois, because I've asked this question all across Illinois, if you ask what's the most important purchase in the history of this country for the exact sum of $24, people know, high school students know, old people know, that we're talking about the purchase of Manhattan by the Dutch for $24 worth of beads. Well, nothing like this ever happened. It's total BS, and it makes the Indians look stupid. And so teaching and learning that today in the year 2020 is an act of racism. It makes an entire race look pretty darn stupid. They'd sell their whole house, their whole village, their whole agricultural system, and their farms and stuff for this little blob of beads. They're not very bright, but that's how we got the country fair and square. Well, it really isn't. And so if you learn something like that, then you unlearn it, then maybe you're open to learning some other things and unlearning some other things. In other words, you maybe the first step in realizing that much of what you've learned is BS.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Micah. Does anyone know of a sundown town or any small town around that has carried out a South African style truth and reconciliation effort, where the towns come together and really try to address their history and acknowledge it and be open about it?
That would be great. I don't. The closest I've come is the two towns I mentioned that are at my website, Goshen, Indiana, and La Crosse, Wisconsin. They both admit openly that they were a totally discriminatory exclusion sundown town. And so that's something. We don't have the thing of like individuals stepping forward and saying, especially because of course many of them are no longer alive, but they could say, you know, my father told me he did this and so on. That hasn't happened, that kind of individual responsibility that has happened in South Africa.
The next question is from Fran for Jessica and Takia. What specific actions would you like the residents and civic leaders of Anna to take now?
I still want them to acknowledge, as I was saying, they still act like, you know, they never heard about it being, well, they heard about it being racist, but it's been years ago and that it doesn't happen anymore. And yeah, I just want them to acknowledge that, you know, that it's still going on, so we can find ways to stop it. You know, the first step is acknowledging that things are happening.
Acknowledge that our skin color is not a crime and that we should not be judged because of the color of our skin. They need to acknowledge it and come together and make it seem like we're all people, we all have equal rights.
So, oh, were you still going on? I'm sorry.
No.
So this is a question from Benita for Logan, kind of related to, you know, whether people are acknowledging the history of Anna openly or not. So a question for Logan, was this, you mentioned that when you first went to Anna, there was a server who told you the history of Anna and sort of explained the acronym. Was that person proud or ashamed of the history when they shared that story with you?
My sense, it was certainly not shame, and it's hard to really say exactly what their intention was. So it was a person who lived in Anna. It was a patron of the bar and restaurant that I was at, and you know, and what was interesting to me is that, including this person, nearly everyone I spoke with, the next question that I would ask them when I asked them if they had heard about ANNA, and then get sort of their story on how they first heard it, the next question was, well, then what do you know about it? Like, is that true? Like, what happened? That would be the follow-up question. And that's when I heard a lot of different sort of explanations and rumors and started to realize that there was a disconnect. And this is something that Dr. Lowen also writes about in his Sundown Towns book, is there's this disconnect between knowing, like, you know that this town, for example, is known as ANNA, and you know something must have happened, but the stories are all over the place and really become this sort of local legend that don't show a narrative or a story that points to something in which the current town or a community could take responsibility for. And so there's this sort of disconnect between that was the past, but when did that end? And I don't know if I'm answering this question super distinctly, but that, you know, I just wanted to be clear that it's not like people are going around saying, from my experience at least, it's not like people in Anna are going around saying, hey, you know, ANNA, right? Or anything like that. Some people were very ashamed of it, but I think it was an interesting question to try to figure out what is the it, and that's where my work came in.
Thank you. Okay, next question is from Bruce, and this is for Jessica and Takia. What do you think are the keys to moving this issue from a confrontation to a conversation that can have more hope for changing minds?
Huh? I'm sorry.
So you're on the go. I
Yeah,
mean,
I'm on.
if you have any thoughts on that, I guess Bruce is sort of seeing your action so far as being more confrontational rather than, you know, having a full conversation. So what do you think are the keys to sort of moving to a more open dialogue?
I honestly keep an open mind. You got to remember that your opinion is not the only one that matters in that instance, even though it seems like it does because it's the right thing. But others think ways differently, and instead of trying to argue with them, just, you know, I tried to teach you, I tried to help out, I tried to have a simple conversation, and if that doesn't help, then walk away. I just feel like keep it at peace, like approach each other in a good way.
All right, thank you for that. So we have time for one more question. Thank you to everyone who is, you know, still weighing in with really great questions, but we only have time for one more. And I'd love for Mick actually to close out the panel to get some closing thoughts. So I'm gonna throw it back to you, Mick.
Thanks, Cynthia. Yeah, we've talked a lot about what happened. It sounds like Jessica, Takia, you have no intention of stopping. You want to do more education, more events to just get people's attention. I want to ask all the panelists, and we will, you know, obviously take one person at a time, but I'd like to ask all of you, like, do you see ways where the current moment and the rise of voices will actually translate into things that are like measurable progress? What has to happen for that? I get, you know, let's have more events, and maybe that is it. Maybe it's just like, let's have more events, let's have more demonstrations. But at some point in time, does this need to translate into? Are you guys going to pick at the city council to get them to? Somebody talked earlier about a resolution in their town. Are you going to talk about specific ways to change the law? I mean, Jessica, you mentioned just simply wanting to be respected for looking a little different. Are there ways to sort of encode or measure that? Are you thinking about it in those terms? Maybe I start with you.
No, I would really. What we're starting around here now is we have a petition, and we're working with the mayor, the chief, and everything to ban chokeholds and unlawful use of their weapons. So we have a petition going around trying to do that. Man, we are doing more demonstrations, like you said. Just getting a group together on Facebook and talking about anything that you guys have interest in, I feel helps out a lot and helps grow. Unheard, I don't know if you've heard of them. They're from Mount Vernon. They officially started it. I'm currently working through them from Unheard, Union County, and we here soon are looking to like find a pond to like property to make a pond or to make places for where the youth can go and all that stuff. So it's not just stopping at demonstrations. I want to travel. I want the word to be out everywhere. So demonstrations, petitions, always speaking up at any event, I feel would be helpful.
What about you, Takia? Do you feel optimistic that some real change can happen out of this current moment?
Yeah, but basically, like what Jessica was saying, social media is a powerful thing, and that's a good way to get people together and just help bring the word out.
And James, you mentioned earlier that this was, you've had the most fun of your 78 years in these recent times, seeing this reckoning over these untruthful monuments to alleged history. I wonder what your sense is just about this moment of conversation. Is this unprecedented, or have we been here before? Things heat up and they die out? Just kind of wondering if you can put like just the moment of conversation kind of in some kind of context.
Well, interestingly, during Reconstruction, and people don't realize it, that Reconstruction was an ideological movement as well as a political reconstruction of the Southern. In terms of ideology, all across the United States, people became, not everybody, but some people became anti-racist. And the 1866 and 1868 congressional elections were won by Republicans. They were the good guys back then, on an anti-racist platform. And so different states passed different laws that allowed Black folks to vote until the 15th Amendment came across and did it for the entire nation. So we were anti-racist for a period there in the 1860s and 70s, and scatteredly even into the 1890s. And then things closed down and we became mired in what's called the nadir, low point of race relations. And we're still fighting our way back up from that period. And what I'm seeing is the permanent changes being made in the removal of Confederate monuments, the removal of names off of college buildings, because it turns out that that guy was a fan of eugenics and he segregated the entire campus. I mean, that kind of thing happened at the University of Minnesota, for instance, not just down in Alabama or someplace in the South. So I think there's a beginning of becoming aware about race relations and our racial history all across the country. And if we can get these things into the school curriculum and onto the landscape in the form of good historical markers, and then into the sundown towns in the forms of written apologies and new policies to do better, well, those will be permanent changes that'll make it harder for white folks to flip back again and become more racist again.
All right. Thank you for that, Dr. Lowen. That's actually our time for today. Thank you to all of our speakers, including Jessica Moore, who had to step out early, and to everyone who joined us. If you'd like to get invitations to more events like this, you can do that by signing up for ProPublica's Big Story newsletter. You can sign up at propublica.org/newsletters. You can also sign up specifically to the ProPublica Illinois newsletter there too. So from all of us, thank you for joining and have a great day. Till next time.